I never really follow a lot that happens during E3. I'm not actually sure who they're supposed to be talking to, but I'm fairly certain that that person isn't me. They're not really talking to the average gamer because most of what they're displaying is a bunch of tech demos, commercials, and other stuff that we can possibly get excited to. If you look at the trends of the last couple of years, you'll notice that the basic trend is developers and publishers looking for ways to charge you more money for less game. And while it's fairly obvious what my position on that is, I don't really think that that's a lot of what warrants talking about. That being said, I'll go ahead and spend a few minutes on it anyway. As I've said, I don't really think that the people at E3 are talking to game players, because if they were, they would not take hours to deliver about 5 minutes of useful information. When you consider all of the things that Square Enix showed, all that people necessarily care about is the fact that there's going to be a new Tomb Raider, a new Hitman, a new Final Fantasy VII, and some other new IPs that I don't remember the name of. Microsoft spent an ungodly amount of time to say, hey, you can now put in your Xbox 360 discs, and they'll probably work. Last year, Nintendo broke away from this tradition of bloviating so much by putting out a Nintendo Direct that was about a half hour long, filled with a bunch of fluff that was incredibly fun to watch and demonstrated that they were willing to have their executives make fools of themselves to do a bunch of silly stuff to show that they still loved playing games, that they loved making games that were fun to play. That created a huge amount of expectation this year to see what they were going to do. Nintendo did put out an E3 Direct this year, but it was taken to be somewhat lackluster. The puppet Iwata was pretty awesome, especially because it allowed an Iwata that wouldn't have ordinarily participated because he's ill to actually record a few voiceover lines and seem to participate, and everyone loved that. Everyone loved the way that they're being able to be really silly, and incidentally, it does seem that Jim Henson's Muppets were essentially what got used there, and I think that that's freaking awesome. The games that they displayed, however, were taken to be very lackluster. When you look at the graphics of Star Fox 64, Star Fox Zero, they look exactly like Star Fox 64. If you look at the new Metroid game, I'm not really sure why people think that's a new Metroid game. Is it really? There's a lot of ways to argue what is or isn't a Metroid game, but I feel confident in saying what they showed us was not a Metroid game. It may turn into one, but I don't think it will be. Instead of showing us the new upcoming Zelda Wii U game, they instead showed us an update to Link Legend of Four Swords. And while that looks like it could be really awesome, it's not the new Zelda game. In fact, if you look at the majority of the chatter on the internet, the basic theme is one of disappointment. The fact that we're all being slapped in the face by whichever company you choose to name it, the world is going to be destroyed, the sky is falling, etc. Appropriately, this being the internet, I'm not actually exaggerating when I say those things. But really, this kind of attitude is our own fault. If you stop to think for a moment, the person setting us up for this fall is no one other than ourselves, because we get so excited about the potential things that they could be talking about. When they don't talk about those things, we will of course feel like promises have been broken, even though no promises were actually made. And this goes back again to the idea that E3 is not really for me. When you look at E3, it's not actually supposed to be communicating information to the average gamer. It's supposed to be a trade conference where they present stuff to gaming journalists. Gaming journalists look at that information and tell us what's what. However, because we put everything on the internet now and live stream everything, the average consumer is able to look on in rapt wonder or feel their heart shatter into a million pieces as they don't get that thing that they didn't even know that they wanted. While you might think that E3 is being held for game journalists, I still don't think that that can possibly be right, because if you look at the footage of game journalists at particular presentations, they are whooping and cheering like little schoolboys and schoolgirls about to get out of school for the summer, finding out that they're all going to Disneyland. The perfect example of this was when it was revealed that Final Fantasy VII is actually going to be remade as opposed to just ported to the PlayStation 4. I personally don't have strong feelings about it because I feel like we're pretty Final Fantasied out, considering that there are, I think, 4 concurrent properties from it coming up in the next year. When you look at Final Fantasy 14, 15, 11, and then 7, when you look at whatever platform it's going to be coming out on, I've got enough Final Fantasy
The
on my
receiver
plate.
you hear speaking these words was
However,
chosen
this
because
excitement,
it was
while
able to
somewhat
hear such
infectious,
exceptional
also
clarity.
tells you that these
With
game
time, the
journalists
truth
are
would
not
learn this
necessarily
mind,
presenting everything to us
time
with a
is not
clear
something
mind.
we have.
While we love good game
There's a
journalists
threat
for their
everyone
ability to
on
be
your planet,
enthusiastic and
and you have to
knowledgeable about a
awaken your
subject,
mind through your
we hope
media,
that we can hold them to
lowering
be
your
objective
natural
and,
defenses. The coming attack is
dare I say it,
unavoidable.
use
All we
good
can do
ethics
is
in gaming
prepare.
journalism. However, I think the clearest lack of that is when people get so incredibly excited about the wonder and potential of HoloLens, which
Some
really
receivers
sounds
believe the
sounds
message, but are
really
unable
awesome,
to
and I'm
hear
kind
the
of jealous of the
source
people that got to
themselves.
interact with it.
We have
It
developed
wasn't
a
until a
mind
recent
tech
article
called
from Polygon
Mutate,
came out and said, hey,
aiding
by the
your
way,
thinking.
Microsoft
Your
is
subconscious
bullshitting
mind
you.
has been eroded
That
by
huge
dangerous,
Minecraft display that
addictive media.
the guy was looking at
The game
is really
promised
only
to
about the
trick
size
will
of a
trick your
relatively
mind
large
using
postage
its
stamp.
conditioned response to
There are
your
even
demands.
worse examples when
By
you look
providing the
at
correct
Shenmue,
external
which
cues,
may have had a
Cleartake
Kickstarter that was
provides a way
incredibly
to reduce the
successful,
symptoms of media damage.
was apparently a
You have been
fake.
issued a
I
tape.
use the word fake
Put the
perhaps
tape into
very
your
loosely
tape deck
because it
and
is actually
play.
going to become
At
Shenmue
first,
3,
it is normal
and
to hear
it's
only background static.
that part of it is
After
legit.
several sessions, you may
They don't
hear a
actually
voice.
need your money. It's going to be funded, I think, by Sony. So what was the
If you are
purpose of
listening to
having a
this tape, it
Kickstarter,
means
quote
you have
unquote, to
survived
gauge
the mind
interest?
kill.
In other words, all that the
Previous
Kickstarter
attempts to
was
listen to
simply
this tape
an
would have
advertising
found it blank,
campaign,
but now it
especially when
contains
you consider
immediate
all the stage
instructions
presence
of your
that Shenmue
difficult
got
path
during
forward.
E3.
This is
Another
the
example
time
of
that we
almost
have
this
prepared
identical
for.
thing happening
Take a
is the
moment now to
Igavania
find
game
your
coming
fine
out
art.
called Bloodstain. Well, Igarashi-san said in the Kickstarter for it
Some of
that
you
he
will be
had
familiar
funding,
with
which is a
firearms
good
from
thing, and I'm
our
glad that he
training.
said that.
But
The
more
majority of the
recent
money
receivers
that's
will
going
have
to be
focused on mind tech
fronted
in order
to make
survive the
Bloodstain
mind kill event.
is going to be coming from
In
a,
every case,
a
please
company
take a
called
moment to
Cock.
confirm that the firearm
And
has
just
been issued
in
as
case
in
any of you are
working
curious,
order
this
and
is not the
contains
same
one full magazine.
Cock as
You have
what's
also
in the
been
U.S.
issued
Cock
one
Industries,
tape
funded
deck
by
with
the
headphones
quote-unquote
and two
Koch
AA
brothers,
batteries.
who are busy fucking
Once
up
you
the
have
U.S.
checked your
political system.
equipment, leave the
It's
safe cell. Keep moving
it's the
and be
same
careful.
company
The
that bought
threat
up
will
the
have drones
Silver,
or drones
and
near your
they're
location.
totally different. While I admit I did back some money toward the Bloodstained game, I was going to pull out when I saw that it was going to be published by Koch because I thought it was the US one. Be that as it may, you have these two examples of high-profile games that are going to get funded anyway, essentially, but they're moving on to Kickstarter. So I admit I'm going a bit off on a tangent here. We're having a gauge of expectations being made by these publishers to see if they can sell us something later on down the line. So while it seems like I'm going off on kind of a tangent from my original thesis, I'm actually not, because my argument is that E3 is not for the game player. It is not even for the game journalist. It is for the stockholders. It is so that the companies that publish these games can look at their stockholders and say, look at how much enthusiasm and excitement we're generating with our products, so that they can continue to perpetuate the cycle of overcharging us and under-providing to us. In fact, if you go back and watch Igarashi-san's argument for why he's using Kickstarter, he says in his video, as I mentioned, that he's getting money from an outside source if the Kickstarter succeeds. Meaning that even in the world of indie game development, sometimes the indies aren't actually indies. And all that E3 becomes is just an enormous spectacle, an enormous commercial that really, if you have to get a substandard Nintendo Direct with Muppets, that's probably better than having to sit through hours and hours of bullshit from Suits blathering on about this or the other, and then getting a 5-minute trailer that you can just watch far more easily on YouTube.